The train ground into the dusty station at Red Creek, its brakes squealing like a wounded animal. And among the passengers who stepped down was a young woman in ragged clothes, clutching a small canvas bag that had seen better days, her eyes scanning the crowds with a mixture of fear and stubborn hope. Clara Whitlock had traveled nearly 1,000 miles across the country, answering an advertisement placed by a man she had never met, a man who promised work, shelter, and maybe, if destiny was kind, a chance at a life where she wasn't kicked aside like dirt. She had no family left, no money, barely any possessions, but she had heard stories whispered in her burned-down, hometown stories that men out west sometimes took in wives through letters, offering them a new start. She had written, breathless and desperate, and someone had written back. And that someone was wealthy rancher Matthew Harlan, though she didn't know the truth of his wealth then. She only knew he had offered kindness in his neat, steady handwriting. As Clara adjusted her tattered shawl and stepped down onto the platform, she became painfully aware of the townspeople staring. Their gazes brushed her like sharp thorns, murmurs, snickers, eyebrows raised at her threadbare dress and the hole in her left boot. She kept her eyes forward, determined not to shrink. She had crossed too much distance to crumble now. "Miss Whitlock?" A deep voice called, and she spun around to find a tall man in a dark Stetson, his shirt crisp, his boots polished, his presence commanding. Matthew Harlan looked nothing like she expected from a rancher. He was broad-shouldered, sun-browned, clean-shaven, with eyes the color of warm earth and a composure that hinted at a life with little chaos. He took one look at Clara, one honest, sweeping look, and the surprise in his gaze flickered but didn't stay. Instead, something gentler replaced it, something that made her heart twist. He stepped forward, tipped his hat, and extended his hand. "Welcome to Red Creek, Clara. I'm Matthew." She hesitated before placing her hand in his, ashamed of the dirt on her fingers, but he didn't flinch, didn't recoil. His grip was steady, warm, grounding. "It's good to meet you," she managed. The watching crowd whispered among themselves, and Matthew's jaw ticked as he heard them. Without releasing her hand, he reached for her canvas bag and froze when it practically weighed nothing. "Is this all you brought?" he asked softly. Clara swallowed, her gaze falling to the dusty boards beneath her boots. "It's all I have left." Matthew said nothing for a moment. Then he took the bag in one hand, placed his other large palm on her back, and guided her away from the gawking townspeople toward his carriage. As they walked, she heard someone mutter, "Didn't tell her he was wealthy, did he? Sweet thing's gonna faint when she sees that ranch." She didn't understand what that meant, but Matthew shot the man a glare so sharp the fellow shrank behind a crate of oranges. The ride to Matthew's ranch was long and beautiful, passing golden fields, tall oaks, and distant hills painted blue by the sun. Clara clutched her hands in her lap, trying not to tremble. Matthew kept glancing at her, studying the bruises on her arms, the scar peeking beneath her sleeve, the way she jumped at sudden sounds. He didn't pry, but his eyes softened with each passing mile. "What made you answer my letter?" he asked eventually. She took a shaky breath. "I wanted a place, a chance to start again." "You seemed kind." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing every syllable. "And you, Clara? What made you write your letter?" She turned toward the window, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to disappear before anyone ever truly knew me." Matthew didn't speak after that, but a silent promise filled the space between them. When the carriage approached the Harlan Ranch, Clara's breath caught. The house was enormous, 3 stories, bright white paint, wide porches, tall windows that shimmered in the sunlight. Dozens of ranch hands were tending to horses, cattle, and wagons. Flower beds lined the walkways. It looked like a home pulled straight from the dreams she had long abandoned. She looked at Matthew, bewildered. "You live here?" It's nothing fancy, he said, shrugging in a way that made her almost laugh through her shock. It's too big for one man, really. Her heart pounded. She had thought she was traveling to meet a modest rancher, not a man who owned an empire of land. But Matthew didn't boast. He didn't rub his wealth in her face. Instead, he watched her carefully, as though worried this would scare her off. Inside, the house was even more impressive, with polished wood floors, tall ceilings, a sweeping staircase, and rooms filled with sunlight. Clara couldn't step too far inside. She froze just past the threshold, terrified she would dirty the floor simply by existing. Matthew noticed. He came to stand beside her. "Clara," he murmured, "you belong here if you choose to. This isn't a place you have to tiptoe through." Her eyes burned, but she blinked hard, refusing to spill tears on his fancy floor. He introduced her to Mrs. Grafton, the kindly housekeeper, who looked at Clara's clothes and immediately asked, "Bath first or supper first, dear?" Clara flushed with embarrassment. Matthew stepped in smoothly. "Whatever Clara prefers." She's had a long journey. Clara opted for the bath, though her hand shook as she accepted the fresh towel and simple cotton dress laid out for her. She scrubbed herself until her skin was raw, letting weeks of soot, sorrow, and fear bleed into the soapy water. When she stepped out, the woman in the mirror hardly looked like the girl who disembarked from the train. Her hair was clean and loose, her cheeks flushed from warmth instead of cold. And although the dress was plain, it was fresh and whole. At supper, Matthew surprised her by sitting beside her instead of at the head of the long table. He spoke to her as though she were an equal, asking what foods she liked, telling her stories about the ranch, and never once making her feel out of place. She found herself smiling, small, cautious smiles, but smiles nonetheless. Over the next few days, Clara learned Matthew had never intended the mail order letter to be about marriage at first. He sought a woman to help manage his home, someone to bring warmth and life back into it after his parents' passing. But as he got to know her, her quiet resilience, her sharp mind, her unexpected humor, something shifted. He watched her win over ranch hands by mending torn shirts, watched her help Mrs. Grafton cook supper when storms knocked out the power, watched her tend to an injured colt in the barn with surprising tenderness. And Clara, despite her best attempts to remain guarded, found herself drawn to Matthew too. He was patient. He listened. He didn't ask for what she wasn't ready to give. One evening, as they stood on the porch watching the sunset, Matthew finally spoke the words that had been building between them for weeks. "Clara," he said softly, "I want you to stay. Not because I need help with the house or the ranch, but because the day you stepped off that train, everything about my life changed for the better." She turned toward him, heart hammering. "I don't have anything to offer you," she whispered. "You have everything to offer me," he replied. "Strength, kindness, a heart I want to spend the rest of my life earning." Her breath hitched. "Are you asking?" He took her hands gently, his voice steady as the earth beneath them. "Clara Whitlock, will you be my wife?" Tears spilled before she could stop them, hot trails down her cheeks. She nodded, barely able to breathe. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Matthew. I will." The wedding was small but beautiful. She wore a simple white dress sewn by Mrs. Grafton and the ranch hands' wives. Matthew stood beside her in a fresh suit, eyes never leaving her. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew kissed her with a tenderness that made the entire crowd fall silent. Months passed and Clara blossomed in ways she never imagined possible. She ran the household with grace, cared for the ranch hands like family, and turned the once quiet home into a place filled with laughter and warmth. Matthew adored her openly, proudly. Whenever townspeople whispered that she came in rags, he would take her hand and say, "And I'm the luckiest man alive because she walked into my life." Clara had arrived in rags, But Matthew saw the worth she carried in her spirit worth, richer than all the land he owned. And together, they built a life not defined by where she came from, but by where they were going. A life built on love, respect, and a promise born the moment he reached out his hand on the dusty platform of Red Creek.